For those of you I haven't met or who haven't heard me speak earlier today, my name is Mark Wiesendanger. I'm the Director of Development at MaineHousing, and we're really excited to be here. Small-scale development is something that really we haven't focused on much in the past, but we're really trying to focus on now. We're well aware that some of our larger programs, like the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, for instance, doesn't work well in every scenario, in every community. A lot of towns can't, have very low rents, and doesn't make the project pencil out, doesn't have the scale that a larger city has. So we're trying to develop some other programs that can work in other areas of the state. Certainly the rural program is a great one, but we also have islands programs, for instance, that are very specific to certain communities. And while we're doing this, we realize that we're working with a whole new batch of developers. And a lot of these folks don't have much experience, certainly aren't familiar with working with MaineHousing, which admittedly can be confusing, difficult, bureaucratic. I've heard it all. It's not because we want to be, it's often because we have to be, because we're stewards of taxpayer dollars, because we are administering federal funds, and they come with a lot of requirements, and they're really not up to us. But we have to enforce those rules, or else we don't get the money to build the housing. So I apologize for all the junk you have to go through, but you gotta go through it. That said, we have these newer programs we've created are far simpler. They don't come with all the hoops, and so it's a little more welcoming to newer developers. And I think also it could be like the gateway program for future tax credit developers. At least that's what I'm hoping, because we want more people working in this field. So that said, we do have a technical assistance contract with the Genesis Fund. John Egan, standing behind me, is kind of spearheading that effort with the other folks at Genesis. And really, his job is to help us figure out where we need to create new housing, what that looks like, but also to help those folks who want to create new housing learn how to work with us. And it certainly benefits the developers in that they get a lot of expertise for free, mind you, and it helps us a lot because the people that come to us applying for funding are ready to go. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get funding, but it puts you in a much better position than you would be in otherwise. So I highly recommend talking to John or the other folks at the Genesis Fund if you are interested in any of our programs. And I'm always happy to talk about any of our programs one-on-one as well. With that said, we do work with the Genesis Fund a lot. We do have Haley Ward working on a lot of our projects too. These are the guys that know how to do this work. I'm just the guy that doles out the cash. So I'm going to pass it off to them. If you have any questions for me, please come and see me. And thanks for being here.
All right, thanks, Mark. My name is John Egan. I'm with the Genesis Fund, and we're going to roll up our sleeves and get kind of technical, not like engineering technical, but kind of technical. And joining me is John Whitten from Haley Ward, preeminent engineering planning firm from the state of Maine. And we're going to walk through some details of how to put or at least suggestions of how to put your small-scale development project together. Mostly, these are sort of reminders about don't forget this and don't forget that when you go talk to your municipal official, when you go talk to your lender, when you go talk to your banker, when you go talk to your spouse about, we're really going to put our checkbook into this. These are best practices that we've come across. The Genesis Fund works, as Mark said, under a contract to provide this coaching, this one-on-one advice. The Genesis Fund doesn't actually do the development. We'll stand next to you. We'll help you fill out applications. We'll help you put plans together, connect you with vendors, surveyors, wetlands, delineation engineers, architects, those kinds of things. And then we'll help you find the front door at MaineHousing for the financing, and then help you get through that front door. So that's the scope of the contract that we have. We just got it renewed, so we're all the way through 2024 for this. And MaineHousing will have a funding round for small-scale rental developments coming up late summer. I've heard that phrase. So I'm into a microphone on tape. We're saying MaineHousing is going to have a program late summer. That's an inside joke I'm ribbing Mark about because we really want that deadline so people have some predictability. And they, so late summer, that's when the program is coming out. So, and if you have been to one of our workshops, and we've been traveling around the state doing them, you'll see a lot of familiar things here if you've been to one of those before, so I apologize for any repetition. But we sometimes, we just really get down to the basics. So some of this stuff may seem rudimentary if you've already been developing, maybe just a reminder of some things that you don't want to forget. And so the topic today is going to be broken into 3 parts. I learned in college a million years ago, the Psychology 101, the standard brain can handle 3 things at once. And any more than that, then you sort of lose track of them. So I try and distill presentations, topics, complex issues into 3 things. And so that's what we have today. So just give you a quick explanation of the Genesis Fund itself. We are a nonprofit CDFI, that's Community Development Financial Institution, which is really a acronym for a designation that we get from the U.S. Treasury Department. And that allows us to borrow money from the Treasury at very favorable rates so that we can loan it to you. The Genesis Fund itself is about a little over $50 million fund, started 32 years ago. And it is mostly comprised of investments and borrowings from banks, institutions, and increasingly a little over 25% now, individuals who make individual investments in the Genesis Fund in exchange for a modest return, practically no risk, and the comfort and satisfaction of knowing that your work is doing good benefits in communities around Maine. The Genesis Fund operates statewide. We do a couple of things in New Hampshire and Vermont, but we're primarily a Maine-based organization. We have a staff of 11 based in Brunswick, and we travel around for both lending and technical assistance, and we travel often to Augusta for policy work. So we get involved in all 3 of those aspects, and if you want to learn more, please just go to our website, our brand new website, and find out about the Genesis Fund. Okay, so here's my reduction to 3 things. This is not a grad school or copyrighted model here. This is just something I found in practice, being able to explain things. In looking at the complexities of how to get started on a project, even if you might own a duplex or 2, or you've got a commercial property that has an apartment or 2, if you're starting out with a new development, with today's material and labor costs, it can be quite daunting, even if the last one you did was just a couple of years ago, because of cost increases, labor shortages, being able to get people to return your calls, and the permitting process. And let's not forget the public permit process through, most projects have to go through some kind of planning board, and that can be tenuous depending on your community. Get them all up on the screen. So we're going to break down the process into 3 components, and are going to go into some detail about each of these. Understanding what it is about your site, and that can be just a piece of land, or that can be a building that is out of use, which is a nice way of saying a dilapidated structure that may come down, or it could be preserved. And there's a very valuable tool in Maine called the Historic Preservation Tax Credit, which matches with the federal Historic Preservation Tax Credit. And so if you have an old building and you're talking with your community about what to do with fill in the blank, the old school, the old church, the old mill, the old warehouse building, don't forget before you take it down or make plans to demolish it, that there may be an opportunity to preserve it and get a historic designation. And there's a whole bunch of value that you can bring in with historic credits. I talked about that yesterday. I won't cloud up today's conversation with it, but to understand your site is to understand what's happening there, and that's just the start of really recognizing everything that you have to be in command of when you bring your project forward, because you're going to get asked questions by your local municipal officials. You're going to get asked questions by your finance partners. You're going to get asked questions by your attorney who's putting together your documents to really understand the site, your entity structure, or your ownership structure of your entity that's going to develop the property, and then the financing, and we can help you with the financing piece. So I'm going to ask John to chime in on specifics about the site. I'm not going to read all the text here, but these are just some of the highlights that you really want to understand when you're going about finding a site. Maybe you have one under contract, maybe you even already own one, but you're not sure about what you own. Do you know what's underneath the ground? Do you know if there's environmental hazards? Do you know what your utility connections may or may not be? There's a power line easement over here, so you can't put the back of the building on top of the power line easement. You have a curb cut that you want to put for your driveway over here, but this is a road where DOT is going to say, no way you're ever going to put traffic on here. So you have to understand all of those things, and getting a handle on it is the best way to get a handle on that is to talk to an engineer.
Thanks, John. I'm John Whitten. I'm a civil engineer with Haley Ward. We're located up and down Maine itself and throughout New England, and actually Florida. But I've seen a real uptick in these types of projects the last couple of years, and just seem to be more and more frequent as we're getting calls from people that want to basically get in line for this type of funding, and it's a great thing to see. So yeah, from the engineering side of things, in site selection and getting everything lined up, companies like ours can get involved. We are not free, I will say that, but we can do a lot of upfront work at a pretty efficient price, and look at the existing conditions of the site, get you survey services so that you know what the properties are, deed research, ordinance research, check in with utilities, and kind of educate you on those utilities. If it's public sewer and water, that's one thing. If it's something that you need a septic system and wells involved, then there's nuances with that. So we can help with the early stages of the design and planning process so that you can make decisions on the financial side of things about how involved you want to get, how good is this site or not, and prepare for that permitting side of things with the town or other agencies that may get involved. So one thing about the small scale development that's nice is that there's a lot of wiggle room to fit things in that may not be available for bigger projects. And we have expertise in-house for ordinance review and ordinance writing, contract zoning, waiver requests, things like that. So there's a lot of things that we can incorporate with this small development, and talk to towns and municipalities and cities about, maybe that parking space doesn't have to be 10 by 20. Maybe we're talking more 8 by 18 or something, and maybe that aisle width doesn't need to be 24 feet for this project. Maybe granite curbing is not needed for this particular project. And we have enough experience with the stormwater management planning stuff that we realize that not every site needs a $30,000 proprietary stormwater device. So we can work with you on those things, and establish all the environmental regulations or conditions, I should say. Phase 1 ESAs, hazardous waste, special waste, and get you predictions on what that is going to entail for that particular site. And so a lot of our work is focused on that early stage with these types of projects. And then once decisions are made and funding is available, then we switch into the design and full permitting side of things, depending on the project, and can certainly help with all of that. And just at Haley Ward, we're multidisciplinary. We can help you with building design, we can help you with the survey, the environmental, the engineering, the MEP engineering, all of that. So please think of us the next time you have a project. So, thanks.
Thanks, John. I think a couple of things. One, we'll say it again a number of times, how important it is that you as the developer are not going to be just you as the developer. It's so important and so crucial to be assembling a team and to have that team also be ready to take new inputs coming in. And you and your site planner may think this is where the building is going to go and the roadway access is going to be here, or the driveway, and it's going to be 3 stories tall and it's going to have a pitched roof. And you start out with that and you find out through investigations about the site and the zoning and what your municipality is going to allow, that in order to do that, your particular vision, you might have to go through a hopscotch of all of these other steps. And hopefully if you're developing a relationship with your municipality and your code office and your planner, they might also say, but if you change your project just a little bit, we can give you this 3-step hopscotch instead of this 33-step hopscotch. And you might have to then say, okay, we're at a decision point. I might have to pivot a little bit. I might have to yield a little bit on my vision. It's good to get these things cleared up before you engage the architect, because that could be expensive if you're paying for those designs and then you have to pivot again. So there is a real sense of understanding the sequence. Engineers like Haley Ward can help you understand what that sequence is. So you might have to make those small adjustments as you're planning going forward. And those of you in the room who've done this development, I can see some nodding heads. You understand that not everything finishes up the way you started it out to be in terms of your overall vision. So understanding the site and what's capable to be put on the site, again, whether it's renovating an existing structure or building new, the steps are largely the same to really understand, again, working with your team and your local municipality. I can't stress that enough, how important it is to build that relationship with your local municipality. Most of the time, town governments and even city governments are stretched thin. They're understaffed. They don't have enough people to spend 5 hours with you this week on navigating how to get through the problems on your site. So just be respectful of that, and again, that's all the more reason why to bring in some horsepower on your team. I'm not trying to underestimate how expensive that can be. Doing real estate development includes risk, and it includes putting a healthy 5-digit number at risk during those early stages. That's not insignificant, and it's difficult to do that unless you have either a partner or a bank account that can handle that. So there are places and appropriate times when the project and the developer can apply for what's called pre-development funding. There's not a lot of sources out there for that, but there are a few. Genesis is one of them. You can talk to folks in our loan team who are sitting in this room about what those procedures and processes look like for pre-development funding. But I just want to, again, stress how important it is. Bring your team together. That team has to get paid, and ultimately, those costs get reimbursed by the final permanent closing. We'll get to the finance piece in just a minute. But somebody has to be the wallet to kind of carry that through. So it's just important to know that ahead of time. So this is where, if I was a little bit better at these presentations, you'd be hearing some music from The Who. And the importance of The Who is to really, is focused at your lender. Because they want to know a lot about who's going to sign the documents for the financing. And so if you come into them and say, I'm John Egan, I'm going to develop this 12-unit building, and they say, okay, well, you know, after some discussions, let me see your numbers, and here's an application for the loan request. And you fill it out, and John Egan is going to be the developer, and John Egan is going to be the owner, and John Egan is going to be the manager. And then the banker is going to say, so you're going to do all of that by yourself? Oh, no, I'm going to make something up. I'm going to do an LLC or create an LP, or I'm going to get a partner. And the banker is going to want to say, okay, that's great, but where are they? I need their information. I need their financials. I need their EIN number. And you haven't even thought about that because you're still busy trying to figure out the wetlands delineation in the parking lot. So all of those things are important to think about ahead of time, which is why I have this as number 2. Even before you get to the money, even before you figure out how much you're going to need to talk to a bank or to MaineHousing or to Genesis about funding, you really want to have your ownership structure thought out and have your partners be right there at the table with you to understand how you're going to deliver this project. Many times with affordable housing on small-scale developments, it works really well to have the developer do what they do really well, which is to develop the property, take some risk, handle all of these vendors and professionals to get the thing permitted, get it constructed, and then hand it off to a community organization, particularly if it's got MaineHousing in there. There's a 45-year loan commitment and use restriction, is to hand that property off to a local community organization who already has the mission alignment to preserve and manage and steward those apartments or that home ownership project. So that can be a really nice partnership. It doesn't just happen from Wednesday to Thursday. You have to cultivate that, and you have to get some communication going, and that local organization is going to need some time to put a process together, to have a board resolution for their board members to ask a lot of questions about who is this developer. So that takes, just plan that time frame out, but that's a really nice model, and it works very well with MaineHousing financing when a developer who might have a track record and understands all of those processes, but is not so sure about signing 45-year loan documents and use restrictions, but there's a nonprofit locally that says, yeah, that's what we do all the time, but we don't have the capacity to do the development. We don't have the bandwidth to go to all these planning board meetings and work with architects and contractors. So you take what's good, what the folks that can do this part good and the folks that can do that part good, and you merge them together in a partnership, and we can help build those relationships. We have really good examples of how we've worked with both sides of that equation. So it's important to understand your who structure, not just for the lenders, but for the long term. If it's a rental property, the long-term management. And again, that agent can be hired out, but somebody still has to be signing those budgets every year. Somebody has to be auditing the audits and submitting them, and tax returns, and all those little things that normally you just hire somebody to go do. The banker or the lender or MaineHousing, they want to know who all of those players are and what's their experience. So the best you can is to line that up ahead of time before you start talking about the money. It's really important to understand that. Again, you can tweak that, but it's really in the sequence to get that structure in place before you actually start negotiating on the funds. And so the third leg of the triangle is the funding. I'm going to talk a little bit about this program called the Rural Affordable Rental Program that Mark mentioned at the top of the session. This is public financing for the production of 5 to 18 unit rental properties. It is called the Rural Affordable Rental because it applies in most of Maine, with the exception of Portland, South Portland, Westbrook, Lewiston, Auburn, and Bangor. And probably on the fringe census tracts of some of those communities, we might be able to make something work if that part of your town is more associated with the rural parts. But particularly, it's a 5 to 18 unit funding scheme. It is designed to be adding new units to the rental market, so it's not designed to fix up your 12-plex. It's designed to add new units because we are desperate for new units in the state of Maine. You've heard several times today and yesterday about the 84,000 units that were short or will be short by 2030. And so we need all the production we can get. And that's affordable housing, that's tiny homes, that's mobile homes, that's single-family homes, that's high-end condo. We need all of it, everywhere. I was in Aroostook County last week doing one of these workshops, and I was amazed to hear that the acuity of the housing shortage in Presque Isle is just as sharp as it is in Brunswick. And the lack of supply and the rising prices and the disconnect between local wages and the real estate prices is almost exactly the same in Presque Isle as it is in Brunswick, which was striking because you have this sense of, well, they're way up there and there's lots of room and everything's going fine. So the housing shortage is everywhere, so you really have to focus on understanding what's happening in your local community. For the funding, back to the program, the 5 to 18 unit financing will come to you in, in 2 different mortgages. MaineHousing is a lender. They don't make grants. even though one of their mortgages might look like a grant, it's really a loan. And the other important thing to know about that is that MaineHousing ultimately will finance up to 100% of your project. There's not many banks. In fact, I'm pretty sure there are no banks that will finance 100% of your project. So that's on the plus side. Of the two financing streams that come to your 5 to 18 unit project, one of them you pay back, and it's paid back by the rental cash flow from the operation of the property. Calculate your gross rents using these restricted rent limits. That's part of the program. Sub out your operating expenses, and then what's left, a good chunk of that, 85% of that, will go towards a loan payment that MaineHousing will make a loan. And they'll size the loan for your project, not based on what your loan request is. They're going to size that loan based on what your project says it can carry for a debt payment, which is kind of 180 degrees different than the way banks underwrite, but it's the way MaineHousing puts their financing together. Once they figured out what the paying loan is, how much your cash flow can carry, the second loan is what's called the subsidy loan or the soft deferred mortgage, and it's at 0%, it's 45 years, and it just sits there. It functions in your property like a grant, or like Uncle Joe's equity writes you a check. And it sits there, and it does not have to be paid back for 45 years. Again, there are no banks that are making $200,000 per unit loans to your project for 45 years that say, just don't worry about paying us back. So that the benefit of the public housing from MaineHousing is nobody else has that kind of financing. Nobody else is really financing 100% of your project. Nobody else is going to stick with you for those 45 years. And the flip side of that, your side of that responsibility coin, is that you agree to operate the property at targeted restricted rents that are no higher than what's called 80% of your local median income. And there's a table for that, and it varies based on your county and location around the state. But let's just say your area median income is, $86,000 a year for a family of 4. You calculate that out. That means that 80% of that translates into a $1,500 a month rent. When you start the budget process in your application, that's the rent you're going to say, $1,500. And it can go up as the incomes go up. But the $1,500 per unit gross rent, I'm getting way down in the weeds here, but that's what's going to drive your income. So that tells you, here's one side of my financing. This is how much I can borrow based on that cash flow. And then the other side is the soft loan, which will be up to $200,000 of subsidy per unit. So that's $2 million if you have a 10-unit deal. That subsidy is put in during the construction and then sits quiet for 45 years. You don't have to pay it back. And for you younger people, I'm sorry, I won't be here in 45 years to help you unwind that. But when you get to the end of the 45 years, both of those loans, the balances are due, and you would then go to MaineHousing and say, I'd like to refinance. Please provide me a payoff, just like you would with any other refinance. MaineHousing is likely to say, gee, John, we'd really like you to stay in the program. How about if we push out the soft financing and we'll renegotiate the paying debt, and you sort of go on your way of keeping the property as affordable. So it is a 45-year relationship that you're agreeing to with MaineHousing. You can sell the property. So I could sell it to my best friend, and my best friend would then have to assume those two loans. So these are just some of the particulars. Again, nobody else has $200,000 per unit in subsidy funding. Nobody else is going to be funding 100% of your project. But on the other side of that coin are some long-term obligations focused on preserving the mission. This is why we're doing this, is to create affordable units. Included with the financing application is a lot of detail about your project and your construction plans. And so again, having a good team together with a design professional or an architect. If you're using modular, you still have to have some kind of printed plans. Usually the modular company will provide those. And MaineHousing will review that. But then you get to closing, and they're going to fund the whole square of that project. And all the money that you've laid out for the previous 9 months, you get paid back. So it is a very attractive program to start out as a small-scale developer because you can get a lot of good experience and a lot of support from both MaineHousing and our contract to provide you details about how to navigate all around all of these things. And there is a modest developer fee. I don't want to underscore that too much, but as in your project, let's say you're doing a 10-unit project, you're eligible in the budget, as long as it fits, to pay yourself $15,000 per unit. So a 10-unit project would be available to pay out a $150,000 developer fee. That would be your payday for this work that you just went, 9 or 10 months through to get financing from. So you are going to get paid. MaineHousing is not expecting you to do this for free. You're not going to get very wealthy on the cash flow out of the property because it's designed to be affordable. If it's throwing off a lot of cash, we didn't set the budget right. But MaineHousing will allow you to take the cash out of the property as long as you're paying the loan and paying the reserves and all the bills and everything. But you're not going to have the usual real estate development outlook, which is, well, I'm going to hold this for 5 or 7 years, and then the market will be up, and I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to get this big gain, and then I'm going to take it and go do something else. If that's your business model, that's great. We hope you go build some more housing units with that gain, but that's not the business model in the financing for MaineHousing. We work with a lot of private sector for-profit developers who take a little while to figure this out, and then say, okay, I understand, and so I'm going to have this LLC in my property go ahead and do this, but the rest of my week is going to be over here with my market rate stuff, and that works fine. Usually that skill set and that experience that you've honed and been tested in the private market usually leads to benefits in the targeted affordable housing project as well. All right, so I went way deeper than I wanted to in a summary session here, but I really wanted to focus on the 3 elements of the site: understanding your entity, the who, and getting to the financing piece, and being aware of what the MaineHousing program requirements are in this rural affordable rental program. And we have some time for questions. We only have 1 mic, so if you yell out the question, I'll repeat the question, and then we'll get to the answers. Mike. Sure. So the question was the definition of a small project. In this particular funding program, the rural affordable rental, it's 5 units up to 18. And MaineHousing's pretty firm on that. The reason for the 5 is if you go to 4 units, there's actually an abundance of single-family mortgage products that will fund a homeowner up to 4 units. So you can live in 1 and rent 3. And there's no need to be competing against that. So it starts at 5 and goes up to 18. Next question. Yes, Liz. Out of the program or out of your project? Right, good question. So the question is, how many projects can the program fund per year? So an example, we worked with over 80 different inquiries, requests, builders, landowners, developers who had questions about this, thought they were going to move forward. We ended up working on 14 of the 16 applications that went into MaineHousing last December, and they funded 6 earlier this spring. And we know of at least 4 that didn't get funded in that round that are going to come back later this summer. The pot of money that is the finite source to fund the subsidy portion of your financing, that's what is in short supply. MaineHousing has plenty of money to make the loan, the paying loan. They could do that all day long, but the projects won't work without the subsidy. The subsidy pool, thanks to our legislators, we have one in the room who sits on the Joint Standing Committee on Housing who made it happen, added an additional $10 million. So there is roughly $26 million available coming up this fall for $25 to $26 million for, I'm getting to the answer, for the program and the subsidy. And we expect to see, at roughly $200,000 a unit, 11 or 12 projects get funded. So it is competitive, and there is risk that you've spent all this money to put an application together and you might not get funded. That is a reality of real estate development. Yes? The question was, will the program allow projects in phases or do it one at a time? I think Mark will, yeah, I was just going to say the short answer is the rural rental program is designed to be simple. Please bring in your project and we're going to fund that project, and if you've got phases, then it's probably not the right fit for the rural. Right. So the question was, can we do a larger parcel of land in phases over time using the same program? And I'm pretty sure the answer to that is no. MaineHousing really wants to see the project, and then because it's a relatively modest amount of subsidy to do a relatively modest amount of projects, they want to sprinkle them around and not be sort of over-concentrating in one area. If you've got market rate units that you can do on the rest of that parcel, that's probably something you could have a conversation about, but in terms of coming back in, even a 2-year wait, like I did it in 24 and I'm going to do it in 26 and I'm going to do another 10 units or 18 units in 2028, that's not what the program is designed for.
And it might work if you wanted to do 9 units. If you wanted, for instance, to do 9 units in phase 1 and 9 units in phase 2, great, but you're not going to do more than 18 units. And the reasoning behind that is that this is designed to work where LIHTC will not work. So if you can build 30 units there, you should probably apply to the LIHTC program.
Right. Mike. Excellent question. Does the 45-year use restriction cover just the rent amount, or does it also cover the income of the tenant? The answer is B, although you'll just be testing the income on move-in, when that tenant first moves in. You don't have to get quarterly, W-2 statements or anything like that. So if the tenant moving into the apartment meets that 80% median income threshold, that or under, then you've met the requirement for that tenant, and the rent corresponds to that income level. Sometimes we get the question, 80% median income is actually high for my rural town. People in my community can't afford $1,400 or whatever the 80% rent is. And so if that's the case in your situation, let's talk early and see if we can bring some sort of rent relief to the project so that we can find other sources to reduce that rent or to subsidize that rent for the population that you want to serve. But the program is going to require that unit generate that income from that rent schedule. So again, that's part of the 45-year relationship. You are going to do tenant income certifications for every new tenant as they move in. After they move in, that's fine. If your tenant stays for 5 years, you don't ever have to get their income stuff after that. You'll have to just send MaineHousing a rent roll every year. But the compliance piece is much lighter on this program than many of their other programs. And that's by design. As Mark said at the beginning, their goal with this program is to bring more folks into the fold of working with MaineHousing, which is different than working with a bank. Other questions? Yes, Liz. Yeah, MaineHousing doesn't have a subsidy program in their development side for anything smaller than 5. But a 4-unit building, and there's a big caveat in here, the the buyer. So there would have to be a homeowner in there, and that homeowner could get a pretty attractive mortgage, particularly through MaineHousing's single-family lending side, to finance up to 4 units, and they would then be allowed to use the rent from the other 3 to pay the mortgage that they borrowed to buy the 4-plex to begin with. Right. The question was, as a developer, do I have to go find a homeowner who's going to buy the 4-plex? And the short answer is yes. That's essentially a home ownership development project, not a rental project. Because you're going to be you're going to be building or developing a unit for a buyer, for a homeowner. And there's, some very attractive programs for that buyer to get from various lenders on how to reduce their cash outlay. There's not anywhere near $200,000 a unit in subsidy to build it, so you have to work with your land costs and how efficient you can build and all of those kinds of things. Other questions? These are great questions. Tom. So the question is, do the typology of the units have to be the same, all 1 bedrooms? The short answer is no. MaineHousing is going to reduce the amount of subsidy if you're building studio units. The value of subsidizing the construction of a 3 or 4 bedroom at $200,000 per unit is obviously a lot different than the value of subsidizing a studio. So if you're going to build a preponderance of studio efficiencies in your property, you're not going to be eligible for that full 200. I don't remember what the dollar amount is, 150, 155, something. It's a smaller amount because it's a much smaller unit. But that's the only sort of curve on that. Otherwise, we worked with a developer who built 16 3-bedroom units, or planning to build 16 3-bedroom units, and the project that some of you may have seen in Madison is a mix of 1s and 2s and studios. These are all largely small multifamily buildings of apartments, walk-ups. Tony. Yeah, the question was, in our experience of looking at all of these different proposals, is there a standard per unit allocation of cost in land and infrastructure separate from the construction? And we could probably calculate that, but my statistics memory says if your range is this big, your average is not going to be very accurate to reflect what reality is, because there's so many that are much lower and there's so many that are much higher. And there really is a big range on land cost and utility infrastructure. The projects that have the best efficiency are the ones that are immediately proximal to public utilities on a flat site without any easements or, or ledge or whatever. That's common sense, but it really plays out that way. Yeah, the follow-up was, what's the dollar amount per unit? I'd have to go calculate that. I don't have that off the top of my head. It's less than 20%, but not a whole lot less than 20% of the overall project. Yes? Yeah, the question was, does the program allow for different types of development that includes dwelling units but also community space? Am I getting that question right? Yeah. Yeah. And that's an excellent way to bring efficiency, to bring in commercial uses or other non-dwelling unit uses, because they can often bring some financing. Unfortunately, the rural rental program is really focused on production of rental units. So it's that particular part of the project might be a good candidate for MaineHousing funding, but the other accessory uses that make a good community or walkable neighborhood, we'll probably have to find some other sources. Go ahead, John.
I can maybe add to that a little bit, is that we've had a few clients that master plan out a larger parcel, multiple uses, and then with the plan of separating out a certain piece of it for this funding that's going to be committed for 45 years, but then they're free to do the other things on the other parts of the project down the line. So definitely that master planning process is important to find out what all can that site support, and then how do you piece all that funding together to get it done. So, yeah. The question is, can we use a condominium agreement to make that separation? I don't know. Can this program support units that are part of a condominium? But it would have to be a separate condominium, right? Yeah, right. It would have to be its own entity for 45 years, kind of thing.
I think that's possible. You're adding three sides of complexity there, but if condo unit A is your commercial tenants on, let's say, the first floor, and condo unit B is 12 units of housing up above, MaineHousing is only going to fund condo unit B, but there are going to be elements of that condo declaration, not to get too down in the weeds, that are going to have to reflect the MaineHousing mortgage. And so the lawyers are going to want to talk to each other about that. But yes, I think technically that is feasible. Tom, almost out of time. Right. The question was, are there criteria of place-based proximity and other amenities within walking distance that are really stressed in the program? The program guide itself suggests that, and there's some components of smart growth that are in Maine's development landscape that, although compliance technically with the state smart growth ordinance is not necessarily a requirement. That's because so many rural towns don't have any complexity for that. But today, they're actually, the points that you get to be competitive are on readiness, your capacity, your experience, and your ability to bring some sources to the table. It certainly is going to be helpful if you're within 5 minutes walk of the library and a downtown village and you're on public water and sewer. That's only going to add to the efficiency of the building. But today, the program does not have any specific site amenity criteria in the scoring. We're almost there, but we're not there yet. We're just about out of time. In fact, we're over time. I don't want to cut off any questions. I'm going to be around. Mark and John will be here as well, so we can answer any further questions individually. Thanks very much for rolling up your sleeves and getting technical.